Your Holiness, we'd like now to begin our dialogue. I'd like to introduce you first to the first presenter who's beside you, but I think you recognize her because you were speaking to her this morning at the high school, Dr. Kimberly Schonert-Reichl. She is an author, an award-winning teacher, a researcher, a professor at the University of British Columbia. For more than 20 years, Kim's research has focused on the social and the emotional learning and the development of children and adolescents, and her work places particular emphasis on identifying the processes and the mechanisms that foster children's positive qualities such as empathy and altruism, resilience, compassion, kindness. Currently, Kim is also the interim director of the Human Early Learning Partnership, and that's an organization that brings together a wide range of scientific viewpoints related to something that matters to you, I know, Your Holiness, which is early childhood development. So, Kim.
Thank you, Maria. So, again, it's a pleasure to be with you in conversation and a dialogue about what's happening in British Columbia right now in terms of education and education of the heart. We were in dialogue. Should I hold it closer? Okay, thank you, Maria. About education of the heart. And you were here in 2006 and then again in 2009. And I want to tell you that those times that you were here sparked a lot of work. And so your emphasis on education of the heart has actually helped transform the BC education system. And part of the Dalai Lama Center for Peace and Education has been a catalyst and a convener about that. So we now have people from government all the way to teachers and students all working together to educate the heart, to bring together that and really that spark. So right now in British Columbia, we're one of the first places in the world, I believe, where we have put part of the education system, in addition to reading, writing, and arithmetic, and the academic subjects, that education of the heart, things related to social and emotional learning, or social and personal competency, is now going to be an explicit and intentional part of the education system. So this... So we really have, so right now there's a transformation happening in kindergarten through 12th grade, through high school, where a focus, in addition to a person learning about communication as well as thinking, there's going to be something called a personal and social competency, where through every single part of the curriculum, children are going to learn about self-awareness, attention, as well as compassion and kindness. And just to show you some of the data that we have, when you were here in 2009, we actually started to get to work. So in 2010, 2011, there's something called school accountability contracts. So right now in British Columbia, we have 60 school districts that comprise a number of different places. In 2010, 2011, when we looked at all of those school accountability contracts of what are they focusing on, 37% focused on social and emotional learning and something called self-regulation or emotion management. Now, when we look today, or last year, 2013, 2014, we see that 90% of school districts in British Columbia have a focus on social and emotional learning and self-regulation. But that's not only it, because they could have this in the accountability contracts, but what are they doing? What turns out in BC, that educators across from scientists as well as superintendents believe in evidence-based practice, informed from science. So we have a number of different programs that go into schools to help educate the heart. So we have a program called the Roots of Empathy, which I believe you've heard of before, where they bring an infant into the classroom. Over 200,000 students in British Columbia have received that program. Another program called Mind Up that brings in mindfulness, attention training, as well as acts of kindness and compassion. over 1,000 teachers in Vancouver have been trained in that program to deliver it to classrooms. And another program called the Friends for Life, which is a program that helps children deal with their negative emotions, such as anxiety, and helps them learn how to be more compassionate and kind. Over 6,000 educators have been able to teach that program. So we really have gone widespread. But that's not enough. I have to sort of, the programs are important, but we also believe that it's important to not only work with the children, but to train teachers who are learning how to be teachers. So in the schools of education where they're learning to be teachers, we have one of the first ever teacher education programs where the people who are learning to be teachers are learning about social and emotional learning. And that's at the University of British Columbia. And we also have a graduate program now, because they went and told us, they went to go be teachers, and they said, can you start a graduate program? For when we go out and teach for a few years, we want to come back and have more education. So we now have a master's program at the University of British Columbia that is on education of the heart. Now, the other thing I wanted to tell you about is basically...
His Holiness is wondering whether there's been any data coming out of actual studies done on the effect on the children themselves so far as a result of these programs.
So that's a very important question, because that's really what I do. I'm a scientist who studies those programs, because I think that it's good to think about, well, they should be working, but we really have to test it. And so we've done very rigorous scientific studies comparing children who have the programs to children who do not, and looking at even things like attention as well as their stress physiology. Does it actually improve their well-being and health? And have had very good results from that. So the science is really critical. And however, the other thing that's really important besides the science of these programs' effectiveness is also, can we assess this? Can we assess how we're doing? There's a saying in education, what doesn't get assessed doesn't get addressed. And so we need to have data to know how our children are doing. Are these programs working? Are we educating the heart? So across British Columbia, and part of actually out of the work of the Human Early Learning Partnership at UBC, we have a measure called the Early Development Instrument that all kindergarten children in British Columbia, teachers complete that, of how children are doing in terms of their social competence, emotional maturity. And we're able to look at that across the entire province of all of the children to see how they are doing. Very good. And then in 4th and 7th grade, when children are 10 and 13, we have another measure called the Middle Years Development Instrument, population-based measures where all children fill out a measure themselves. It's their voices, and it tells us about their optimism, their happiness, their empathy, as well as their supportive relationships with others. And then, to even build that further, through part of a partnership with the Dalai Lama Center for Peace and Education, we have a new measure called the Heart-Mind Index. And this is a measure, we have those, it's up on the screen over here, that looks at things about getting along with others, being compassionate and kind, being alert and engaged, that also gives us another way in which to assess children's well-being and their education of the heart. And this is just growing, but really unique in the world of being able to assess these dimensions, to know how schools and communities can work together to help foster these ideas. However, although I'm giving you all these good news stories and telling you all the great things that are happening, I also have to say that we have a lot of work to do. And a question I have for you is, we've come pretty far in terms of what we're doing, but I just wonder from you what your advice would be to us to move further, to build this in British Columbia and across Canada, to bring in education of the heart in schools, in families, and in communities.
Why I ask to see any because of the examination, the what effect. One occasion, some American scientists even with very short program, about 3 weeks, about 3 weeks sort of training. Before that, they check blood pressure, and amount of stress, and there are some other few more tests. After 3 weeks training, again test. Blood pressure reduce, stress much reduce. As a result, those trained person, then much more calm, much happier, peaceful. So their relation with their
friends and family.
Much peaceful, much happier. So perhaps a few months or in a year, like examination, this is some test. And then also you see inquire their families, what was changed. Evidence.
So the evidence should also include the reports of the important people in their lives, the kind of changes that they see. And then you have a much more comprehensive, kind of more compelling evidence.
Then another, I think this morning, I think our meeting already maps that. I mentioned
at the meeting, His Holiness mentioned the desirability of having some kind of idea of the map of emotions.
I usually call ancient Indian psychology. So because of ancient Indian psychology, very rich, so many Buddhist texts also is a lot of explanation about emotion, about mind, and how to deal these things, how to improve, further strengthen these constructive emotion, and how to reduce this destructive emotion. So this, as a part of academic subject, the ground
sort of lays a ground to have a greater awareness.
So usually I call map of mind or emotion. So as a part of academic education subject, then when you see teacher refer affection or compassion, anger, hatred, then you see the student then knows. If you already know the map of emotion or mind, then they, yes, now that emotion. Then gradually, you see, they let students themselves, you see, see, say, I think 100 different emotions. Which emotion, when they develop, feel happy, or when they develop uneasiness through their own experience, they can tell. So for that,
so often in our own life, kind of we have a naive attitude to our emotional world. So when our mood is bad, we know that we are not feeling okay, but we stop there. We don't go deeper and try to find out where all of these strange, moods are coming from.
Like physical health, some pain, not sufficient. The pain, like, everybody realize the pain is very bad, so should sort of reduce. But unless you know the causes of the pain, difficult to deal. Like illness, is the doctor, the pains or uncomfortable is a symptom. The causes of that, without knowing that, difficult to treat. So similarly, the destructive emotion, effectively deal with destructive emotion, You see, we have to go the more detailed, deeper level, the causes and condition. Of course, immediate condition, quite obvious, but real causes. So the academic subject are development or something.
So if we find a way to present these kind of, in some sense one could say the kind of the ways in which our emotional world work and the causal relations, interrelations among them, then this can be presented more as an academic subject, something that the children can learn.
I think just information. You see, the Buddhist text, which translated from India, mainly the Nalanda sort of scholars, they are writing. So about 300 volumes. So in order to make available to general public, if these information remain in 300 volumes, then say, Buddhist text. So, since few years, we suggested or developed one idea. Out of 300 volumes, we can divide according to the meaning or subject. We can divide 3 parts. First part, science, including mind, emotion, as science subject. Simply explain what emotion, no concept of right or wrong.
Without any moral evaluation.
Then second part, philosophy, about impermanence, including quantum physics, these things, very similar, quantum physics. So explaining the reality through sort of thorough investigation, then quantum physics is developed. Similarly, Buddhist concept, things, if you investigate, you can't find. So this second part as a philosophy. Again, nothing to do with religion. The third part, Buddhist as a religion. So out of 300 volumes, the part of science, now we already compiled.
Created a compilation.
Yeah. So we already start translation, Chinese translation, English translation, Hindi translation, and a few other more languages, like that. So that the purposely, it remain as a Buddhist subject, part of Buddhist subject, that it will never be universal. Take, what about the original source? Doesn't matter. You should take as a sort of subject of science. Then it can be, firstly, academic subject. Then, most important, it can be universal. So the Leviat, otherwise, you see, you just use teachers, or we always say, affection, love is something very important. 1,000 times repeat. Not much.
So we need a bit more depth and force in the content level.
So the academic subjects have intellectual.
For example, if you present the workings of the mind, as it were, adapted from other sources like the ancient Indian psychology, then it will bring a much richer dimension to the content, which will also appeal to the intellect of the young mind.
Thank you.
I think another way to look how to effect these destructive emotion. Destructive emotion also part of our mind, part of our experience. So it's common with other animals. Now we have this special brain, so reasoning. So the intellectual can live.
So it's the faculty of intelligence has an important role to play in the human.
So the effect or emotion, use our intelligence. What is the value? What is the benefit? What is harmfulness?
So this is really important.
I feel. Just I feel like that.